My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 29 years old, and I've spent the last 7 years living as someone I'm not. Not by choice, but by necessity. But on that scorching Tuesday morning in July, standing in formation at Camp Meridian, with sweat already stinging my eyes at 0600 hours, I wasn't thinking about the lie I'd been living. I was thinking about the man barking orders 50 feet away, my father, Sergeant Major David Chen, and how he'd just called me the biggest disappointment the Marine Corps had ever seen. The words hung in the desert air, like heat waves. Chen, Marcus. His voice cut through the morning silence, sharp enough to make the other recruits flinch. Front and center, recruit. I stepped forward. Boot heels clicked against the concrete pad. Every eye in Delta Company turned toward me, waiting for whatever humiliation was coming next. My father stood on the platform with his arms crossed. Aviator sunglasses, reflecting the climbing sun, jaw set in that familiar expression of disgust I'd known since childhood. This pathetic excuse for a recruit, he announced to the entire company, is exactly what happens when you let standards slip. Weak, unfocused, a waste of taxpayer money. His voice carried across the formation like a crack of thunder. I've seen garden slugs with more military bearing. Laughter rippled through the ranks. Not cruel laughter, nervous, uncomfortable chuckles from recruits who didn't know whether to feel sorry for me or grateful it wasn't them in the crosshairs. The drill instructors stood motionless, their faces stone masked. They'd seen family drama before, but never this public, never this personal. I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink, because I couldn't tell them who I really was, not yet. The truth was buried so deep that even the Department of Defense had forgotten it existed, hidden behind classified files that were sealed, then sealed again, then moved to archives that didn't officially exist. The truth was that Marcus Chen, the disappointing recruit getting humiliated in front of 73 other Marines, had spent 3 years as part of something that made Navy SEALs look like weekend warriors. But I couldn't tell them about Nightfall Squadron. I couldn't tell them about the missions that never appeared in any official record, about the targets that were eliminated without a trace, about the operations conducted in countries where we were never supposed to be, wearing uniforms that belonged to no nation, speaking languages that left no footprint. I couldn't tell them that the scar running down my left shoulder came from a sniper's bullet in Kandahar, while protecting a convoy of refugees. That the slight limp in my right leg was from jumping out of a burning helicopter over the mountains of Afghanistan. That the steady hands they mocked for being too slow on the rifle range had once fired a kill shot from 800 meters in complete darkness using nothing but muscle memory and prayer. And I definitely couldn't tell them about the tattoo hidden beneath my regulation undershirt, the one that would make every officer on this base stop dead in their tracks if they ever saw it. The insignia of Nightfall Squadron, a black phoenix rising from silver flames, wings spread across my back from shoulder to shoulder, inked into my skin during a ceremony that never officially happened, by a tattoo artist who died 2 weeks later in a car accident that wasn't an accident. Only 17 people had ever worn that mark. Now, only 3 of us were still alive. My father didn't know. The Marine Corps didn't know. Hell, most of the Pentagon didn't know. But someone on this base did. And when they found out, everything was going to change. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been living under the name Michael Torres in a 1-bedroom apartment above a pharmacy in Detroit. Civilian identity, civilian job, civilian problems. I fixed motorcycles during the day and tried not to dream about sand and gunfire at night. The apartment smelled like motor oil and instant coffee. The walls were bare except for a calendar I never looked at and a mirror I avoided. Every morning, I woke up at 053 out of habit. Every evening, I checked the 3 different email accounts tied to 3 different identities, waiting for a message that might never come, a signal from someone else who'd made it out, a warning that someone was getting close, instructions for the next move. The message that came was none of those things. It arrived on a Thursday evening while I was rebuilding the carburetor on a 1987 Kawasaki. The sender was listed as DM Secure Line 7, and the subject line was blank. When I opened it, there was only one sentence. Your father is training a new kind of soldier. Below that was an address, Camp Meridian, California. Below that, a date, 3 weeks from today. Below that, a single question that made my blood turn cold. Do you remember what they did to Phoenix Team? I stared at the screen for a full minute before I could move. Phoenix Team. The 12-person unit that had died in a helicopter crash 6 months before Nightfall Squadron was disbanded, except they hadn't died. They'd been eliminated because someone suspected they were going to talk. Their deaths had been staged. Their families told they were heroes. Their real bodies buried in unmarked graves in a desert that had no name. I'd been investigating their disappearance when Nightfall got the order to stand down. When we were all given new identities and told to disappear forever. When the program that had turned us into ghosts was itself erased from existence. But Phoenix Team hadn't been working alone. They'd been reporting to someone high enough up the chain of command to make a 12-person special operations unit vanish without a trace. I shut down the laptop and began packing. Within 6 hours, Marcus Chen was dead, and Michael Torres was alive again. I burned every piece of identification, every receipt, every photograph. I dissolved the Michael Torres identity like sugar in hot water, and walked away from Detroit without looking back. By morning, I was in a stolen pickup truck, driving west with nothing but a duffel bag full of unmarked clothes, $4,700 in cash, and a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal. I was going to enlist in the Marines. Not as Michael Torres. Not as Marcus Chen. As someone completely new. Someone with a clean record, and no connections to anything classified. Someone who could walk into Camp Meridian and get close enough to my father's operation to figure out what he was really doing. The irony wasn't lost on me. David Chen had spent my entire childhood telling me I wasn't tough enough for military service. That I was too soft, too weak, too much like my mother. That the Marines would chew me up and spit me out in the first week. Now I was going to prove him right. Because Marcus Chen, the recruit, was going to be everything he expected. Slow, clumsy, unfocused, a disappointment, the perfect cover for someone who needed to blend in, while he investigated what might be the biggest military conspiracy since Watergate. The fake identity cost me $3,000, and took 4 days to establish. Birth certificate, social security number, high school transcripts, even a fake job history. The forger was a nervous man in Las Vegas who asked too many questions, and took too many pills. But his work was flawless. According to the paperwork, Marcus Chen was a 19-year-old kid from Phoenix whose parents had died in a car accident when he was 16. No military background, no special training, no reason for anyone to look twice at him. Just another lost young man looking for direction and discipline. I aged myself backward, changed my posture, altered my speech patterns. I studied videos of actual recruits until I could mimic their uncertainty, their eagerness to please, their fear of authority. I practiced being weak until weakness felt natural. The hardest part wasn't learning to fail, it was learning to fail convincingly. When I walked into the recruitment office in Los Angeles, I was 17 pounds lighter than my real weight, wearing clothes that were slightly too big, and speaking with a nervous stutter that made the recruiter lean forward to hear me. I told him I wanted to prove myself, that I needed structure in my life, that my biggest fear was disappointing people. He signed me up within an hour. And now, 3 weeks later, I was standing in formation while my father, who had no idea who I really was, told 73 other recruits that I was a disgrace to the uniform I hadn't even earned yet. Chen, his voice snapped me back to the present. Did you hear what I just said? Sir, no sir, I replied, injecting just enough tremor into my voice to sound genuinely intimidated. I said drop and give me 50 push-ups. Now, I dropped to the hot concrete and started counting. 1, 2, 3. Each push-up was deliberately slower than it should have been, my form just sloppy enough to look like genuine struggle. Around number 30, I let my arms start shaking. By 40, I was breathing hard enough for the other recruits to hear. Pathetic, my father muttered. Absolutely pathetic. But as I pushed myself up for the 50th time, I caught something in his voice. Not just disappointment, something else. Something that sounded almost like satisfaction. That's when I knew I was on the right track. Because David Chen wasn't just disappointed in his son, he was pleased that his son was failing. and that meant he had reasons for wanting weak soldiers in his program, which meant someone had been very, very right to send me that email. The formation broke at 0630, and we marched to the mess hall for breakfast. Standard Marine Corps chow, runny eggs, burnt toast, coffee that could strip paint. I sat at the far end of a long table, eating slowly, listening to the conversations around me. Most of the talk was typical recruits, complaints about the heat, speculation about upcoming training exercises, nervous jokes about drill instructors. But there was an undercurrent I recognized from my time in special operations: fear. Not the normal fear of military training, but something deep, something that came from sensing there were layers to the situation they couldn't understand. "Hey, Chen," the voice belonged to Rodriguez, a stocky kid from El Paso who'd been trying to befriend me since week 1. "You okay? That was pretty harsh out there." I shrugged, keeping my eyes on my eggs. "I'm used to it." "Used to it? From who?" "My dad." Rodriguez's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "Wait, Sergeant Major Chen is your..." "Yeah." I let the word fall flat, like it was a weight I'd been carrying my whole life. "He is." "Jesus, man, that's gotta be rough." "It's fine," I said quickly. "He's just trying to make me stronger." But Rodriguez was already shaking his head. "Nah, that wasn't about making you stronger. That was personal." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "My cousin went through boot camp at Paris Island 2 years ago. He said the worst thing that could happen to you was having family in your chain of command. They either go too easy on you or they go way too hard to prove they're not playing favorite." I nodded like this was a revelation, but inside I was cataloging information. Rodriguez was observant, more observant than his cheerful exterior suggested. That made him either valuable or dangerous. "Has he always been like that?" Rodriguez asked. "Pretty much." I pushed eggs around my plate, building the character. He wanted me to enlist right out of high school, but I wasn't ready. Spent a year working dead-end jobs instead. I think he sees this as his chance to prove he was right all along. "What kind of jobs?" "Gas station, pizza delivery." "Nothing important." Rodriguez nodded sympathetically, but I caught him studying my hands, looking at calluses that didn't match the story I was telling. I made a mental note to be more careful. Across the mess hall, I spotted my father sitting with the other senior NCOs. Sergeant Major David Chen, 46 years old, 24 years of service, decorated veteran of 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. To everyone else, he was a model Marine, tough but fair, demanding but respectful, the kind of leader who turned boys into men and civilians into warriors. But I knew things about David Chen that weren't in his service record. I knew he'd been passed over for promotion to first sergeant twice, because of interpersonal issues with subordinates. I knew he'd been quietly transferred out of his last posting, after complaints about training methods that bordered on abuse. I knew that my mother had filed for divorce, not because of his deployments, but because of what he became when he came home. And I knew that 3 months ago, he'd been handpicked to run a special training program at Camp Meridian, a program so classified that even the base commander wasn't fully briefed on its objectives. My father caught me looking and his eyes narrowed. Even from across the room, I could feel the weight of his disapproval. But there was something else in his expression. Something calculating. He was studying me too. After breakfast, we had 2 hours of physical training, running, calisthenics, obstacle courses. I made sure to finish in the bottom third of every exercise. Breathing hard, sweating more than necessary, always just a little behind the pace. The performance had to be consistent. Good enough to avoid being dropped from the program, bad enough to avoid drawing positive attention. The hardest part was the obstacle course. I'd run variations of the same course hundreds of times during nightfall training. I could complete it in under 90 seconds without breathing hard. But Marcus Chen, the disappointing recruit, needed to struggle. So I stumbled at the rope climb, hesitated at the wall jump, and took nearly 4 minutes to finish what should have been a 2-minute course. "Chen!" Drill instructor Williams called out as I crossed the finish line. "What was that supposed to be?" "Sir, I was trying my best, sir." "Your best looks like my grandmother's worst." "Hit the course again." I ran it again. This time I took 4.5 minutes. adding a spectacular fall from the parallel bars that left me covered in dirt and breathing like I'd run a marathon. Williams shook his head in disgust. Again, third time, I managed to shave 30 seconds off my time. Enough improvement to suggest I was learning, not enough to suggest I had any natural ability. Williams finally waved me off with a look of resignation. But as I walked back to join the group, I noticed someone watching from the observation tower. A man in utilities with no visible rank, standing just back from the railing where the shadows would obscure his face. He was too far away for me to make out details, but something about his posture set off every alarm bell in my head. Nightfall Squadron had taught me to read body language like a native language, and this man's stance was all wrong. Too relaxed for a drill instructor, too focused for a casual observer. He was studying the recruits with the methodical attention of someone gathering intelligence, and his attention was fixed on me. I forced myself to look away and rejoin the group, but the sensation of being watched crawled up my spine like a spider. Someone was paying attention to Marcus Chen. The question was whether they'd seen through my performance or were fooled by it. That afternoon brought classroom instruction, military history, chain of command, basic tactical principles, standard bootcamp curriculum delivered in a windowless building that smelled like sweat and floor wax. I sat in the back row, taking notes like an eager student, asking just enough questions to seem engaged without seeming intelligent. But halfway through the lesson on squad movements, my father appeared in the doorway. The instructor, a gunnery sergeant, whose name tape read, Morgan, immediately called the room to attention. "As you were," my father said, but his presence changed the energy in the room instantly. Everyone sat straighter, breathed quieter. He walked slowly down the center aisle, hands clasped behind his back, inspecting each recruit, like he was looking for defects. When he reached my row, he paused. "Chen, sir." "Yes, sir. You're falling behind in PT score." "Sir, I'm working to improve, sir." "Working isn't good enough. Results are what matter." He leaned down slightly, bringing his face closer to mine, close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath, see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow that he'd gotten falling off his bike when he was 8 years old. "You have 2 weeks to bring your scores up to minimum standard. If you can't do that, you'll be recycled to a new company and start over from week 1. The threat was delivered quietly, matter-of-factly, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Around me, I could feel the other recruits tense. Being recycled was one of their greatest fears, losing weeks of progress, being separated from the group they'd bonded with, having to start the entire nightmare over again. "Sir." "Understood, sir." But as my father straightened up, something flickered across his face. Just for a split second, his expression softened. Not with affection, with something harder to identify, almost like recognition, like he was seeing something familiar. Then the moment passed, and his face returned to its mask of professional disappointment. He continued down the aisle, made a few general comments about the importance of physical fitness, and left, but the look lingered in my mind for the rest of the afternoon, because I'd seen that expression before, not on David Chen's face, but in pictures from his early career, when he was young, and eager, and stationed at bases, whose names were still classified, before the failed promotions and the interpersonal problems and the quiet transfer, before whatever had happened to turn a promising Marine into someone who took pleasure in humiliating his own son. That evening, after lights out, I lay in my rack, listening to the sounds of 73 other recruits, trying to fall asleep. Quiet conversations, muffled coughing, the occasional whimper from someone having a bad dream, standard military barracks sounds that should have been comforting in their familiarity. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was building toward a moment I wasn't prepared for. The feeling that someone was getting close to figuring out who Marcus Chen really was, and the growing certainty that my father's special training program had connections to Nightfall Squadron that went deeper than anyone suspected. In the darkness, I traced the outline of the phoenix tattoo through my undershirt. The raised skin, the intricate details that marked me as someone who'd been through hell and survived. Tomorrow, I'd continue playing the role of a weak, struggling recruit. I'd fail more tests, stumble through more exercises, and endure more humiliation. But eventually, the truth was going to come out, and when it did, David Chen was going to learn that his disappointing son had become something he never could have imagined, something that might be his worst nightmare. Week 4 started with a surprise inspection at 8:43. Drill instructors flooded the barracks with flashlights and shouting, dragging us out of our racks, before most of us had even processed being awake. Standard operating procedure for keeping recruits off balance, except something felt different about this one. The inspectors weren't just looking at our lockers and footlockers, they were examining us, running hands along our backs, checking for scars, looking at our hands and arms, with the methodical attention of people searching for something specific. When they reached my rack, I forced myself to stay relaxed. The Phoenix tattoo was completely covered by my regulation undershirt, and I'd been careful to keep any other identifying marks hidden, but my heart rate spiked when the inspector, a staff sergeant I didn't recognize, ran his hands along my shoulders. "Any tattoos, recruit?" "Sir." "No, sir." He stared at me for a long moment, then moved on to Rodriguez, but I caught him making a note on a clipboard, a small mark next to what was probably my name. They were building a database, cataloging physical characteristics, looking for something or someone, looking for survivors of Nightfall Squadron. The inspection lasted 90 minutes. When it was over, we were given 5 minutes to dress and form up for morning PT. No explanation, no apology for the lost sleep, just business as usual in the United States Marine Corps. But as we filed out of the barracks, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. 3 recruits were missing: Johnson from 3rd Squad, Patterson from 1st Squad, and Kowalski, the quiet kid from Oregon, who slept 2 racks down from me. All 3 had been there when the inspection started. Now their racks were empty, their gear gone, like they'd never existed at all. "Where's Kowalski?" Rodriguez whispered as we formed up in the pre-dawn darkness. "Probably got recycled," someone else answered. "Failed the inspection." But I knew that wasn't true. You didn't get recycled at 4:30 in the morning without warning. You didn't get recycled and have all your gear disappear within 90 minutes. You didn't get recycled for failing an inspection that wasn't looking for regulation violations. You got disappeared. The PT session was a killer. 6-mile run in full gear, followed by an hour of combat conditioning. I made sure to struggle appropriately, falling behind on the run, stumbling through the exercises, but my mind was elsewhere, processing what I'd seen. 3 recruits removed overnight, after a physical inspection that felt more like a search. Someone was hunting for specific individuals, people with specific characteristics or markings, people who might have connections to classified operations, people like me, which meant I was running out of time. After PT we had 30 minutes to shower and dress before morning chow. I used the time to conduct my own inspection, moving through the barracks systematically, checking which racks were now empty, which lockers had been cleaned out. Johnson's rack, completely stripped, even the mattress was gone. Patterson's rack, same thing, no trace that anyone had ever been there. Kowalski's rack, empty, but something was wrong. His fitted sheet was still on the mattress, tucked in at the corners like he'd made his bed and expected to return to it. I knelt down and felt under the edge of the mattress. My fingers found something small and hard, a piece of paper, folded tight and wedged into the corner where the sheet met the bed frame. I palmed it and walked away without looking back. In the shower, with hot water masking any sound, I unfolded the paper. It was a torn piece of notebook paper with 7 words written in pencil. "They know about the mark. Be careful." I memorized the words, then let the paper dissolve under the shower spray. Kowalski had figured something out, had seen something, and whatever he'd discovered had gotten him disappeared in the middle of the night. But he'd had enough warning to leave me a message, which meant he wasn't just some random recruit who'd gotten caught up in a security suite. He was someone who understood the game well enough to recognize danger and clever enough to communicate without leaving traces. Someone like me. At morning chow, I sat in my usual spot and ate my usual breakfast while my mind raced through possibilities. How many of us were there? How many Nightfall Squadron survivors had gotten the same message I had? How many had decided to investigate their fathers or former commanders or anyone else connected to the program? And how many had already been identified and eliminated? "You look like hell," Rodriguez observed, sliding his tray across from mine. "Couldn't sleep after the inspection." "Yeah, that was weird. What do you think they were looking for?" I shrugged, playing the clueless recruit. Contraband, maybe? Drugs? But Rodriguez was already shaking his head. Nah, they weren't searching for anything small enough to hide. They were looking at us, like they were trying to identify specific people. Smart. Rodriguez was too smart for his own good. Probably just standard security stuff, I said. Making sure we are who we say we are. Maybe, but Rodriguez didn't sound convinced. Did you notice Johnson and those other guys are gone? Recycled, probably. At 4 in the morning, without any of their gear? Rodriguez leaned forward, lowering his voice. My cousin told me about something like this, said sometimes military units would do sweeps looking for infiltrators, people who weren't who they claimed to be. Every instinct screamed at me to shut down the conversation. But that would have been out of character for Marcus Chen. Instead, I let a note of nervous worry creep into my voice. Infiltrators? Like spies? Or deserters? Or people with fake identities? Rodriguez was studying my face carefully. People running from something. That's crazy, I said, but I made sure to sound uncertain. Why would anyone want to infiltrate Bootcamp? Good question. Rodriguez picked at his eggs. Still watching me. Why would anyone want to do that? Before I could answer, the conversation was interrupted by the arrival of my father and 2 other senior NCOs. They stood near the entrance, scanning the mess hall like they were counting heads. When my father's eyes found me, he held my gaze for several seconds before moving on. But it was long enough for me to see that he was looking at me differently now, not with disappointment or frustration, but with something colder, something that looked like suspicion. Rodriguez followed my line of sight. Uh-oh, Daddy doesn't look happy. He's never happy. This is different though. That's not disappointed father face. That's suspicious, NCO face. Rodriguez was right, and that meant my cover was starting to crack. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of weapons training and classroom instruction. I went through the motions, playing my role, but part of my attention was always on the doors, watching for inspectors, for unfamiliar faces, for any sign that the net was closing. During the lunch break, I made an excuse about needing to visit medical for a minor injury and slipped away from the group. Instead of going to the medical building, I headed for the administrative offices. Camp Meridian was built like most Marine bases. Functional buildings, arranged around central courtyards, everything painted the same shade of beige that was somehow both boring and intimidating. The administrative complex was a 3-story building near the main gate, the kind of place where paperwork lived and died and boring people made boring decisions about boring regulations. Except today, there was nothing boring about it. I'd counted on the building being mostly empty during lunch hour, but as I approached the main entrance, I could see unusual activity inside, people and utilities moving with purpose, carrying files, speaking in low voices that suggested urgent business. I circled the building once, using techniques Nightfall Squadron had taught me for reconnaissance, counting personnel, noting vehicle positions, looking for patterns that might indicate the nature of the operation. What I found made my stomach turn. 3 black SUVs parked in the rear lot, engines running, government plates, tinted windows, the kind of vehicles that belong to alphabet agencies with unlimited budgets and flexible morals. A communications van with satellite dishes and antennas that suggested serious surveillance capability. And through a second-floor window I caught a glimpse of something that confirmed my worst fears. A wall covered with photographs, dozens of them, arranged in rows like a mission board, too far away to make out details, but the organization was unmistakable. They were building profiles, tracking individuals, conducting the kind of investigation that ended with people disappearing, the kind of investigation that had probably claimed Johnson, Patterson and Kowalski. I'd seen enough, time to get back before anyone noticed I was gone. But as I turned to leave, I found myself face to face with the man I'd seen watching from the observation tower during PT. Up close, he looked like every other government operator I'd ever met. Average height, average build, forgettable face, eyes that missed nothing. Lost, recruit. Sir, I was looking for medical, sir. Medical's the other direction. He stepped closer, invading my personal space in a way that was calculated to make me nervous. What's your name, sir? Chen. Marcus, sir. Chen. He repeated the name like he was tasting. Any relation to Sergeant Major Chen, sir? He's my father, sir. The man nodded slowly, like this confirmed something he'd already suspected. Interesting family dynamic you two have. I didn't respond, couldn't respond without risking breaking character. Tell me something, Chen. Why did you decide to enlist, sir? I wanted to serve my country, sir. That's what they all say. But I'm curious about your timing. Why now? Why this base? The questions were casual, conversational, but I could feel the weight behind them. This wasn't a random encounter. This was an interrogation disguised as small talk. Sir, I was ready to make a change in my life, sir. What kind of change? Sir, I wanted to make my father proud, sir. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. How's that working out for you? Before I could answer, he stepped aside and gestured toward the path back to the main base. Better hurry, recruit. Don't want to be late for afternoon training. I nodded and walked away, fighting every instinct that told me to run. Behind me, I could feel him watching until I disappeared around the corner of the next building. The encounter had lasted less than 3 minutes, but it had told me everything I needed to know. They were definitely hunting for Nightfall Squadron survivors. They had reasons to suspect Marcus Chen might be one of them, and they were getting close. That afternoon's training was combat simulation, hand-to-hand fighting, tactical movements, weapons handling under stress. The kind of training that would reveal any advanced skills I might be trying to hide. I failed spectacularly, stumbled through the fighting techniques like I'd never thrown a punch, fumbled with weapons like I'd never seen them before, moved through tactical exercises with all the grace and coordination of a drunken elephant. But while I was busy failing, I was also watching, studying the other recruits for signs that any of them might be more than they appear, looking for tells, for moments when training took over, and someone moved with more skill than their cover identity should possess. I found two. Williams, a kid from Detroit who claimed to have never been in a fight in his life, but whose stance and footwork suggested extensive martial arts training, and Davis, a farm boy from Kansas whose weapon handling was just a little too smooth, a little too practiced for someone who'd supposedly only ever shot at rabbits. 3 of us, maybe more, all of us hiding among the legitimate recruits, all of us pretending to be something we weren't, all of us investigating something connected to our past lives. But whoever was hunting us was getting closer, and they were starting to narrow down their list of suspects. That evening, after lights out, I lay in my rack and stared at the ceiling, processing what I'd learned, calculating odds, planning contingencies. In the darkness, I could hear someone moving quietly between the bunks, footsteps so soft they were barely audible, but definitely there. Someone was conducting their own reconnaissance, checking on specific recruits, maybe looking for the same thing the official inspectors had been searching for. The footsteps stopped next to my rack. I kept my breathing steady, my body relaxed, feigning sleep while every nerve screamed at me to move. Whoever was standing there, they were studying me. I could feel their attention like heat from a flame. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the footsteps moved on, but they didn't go far, just to the next rack over where Rodriguez was sleeping. Another long pause, then the footsteps continued, methodical and purposeful, checking specific individuals throughout the barracks. When they finally stopped, I counted 12 recruits who'd received special attention from our midnight visitor, 12 people who were now on someone's list of suspected infiltrators. I closed my eyes and tried to get what sleep I could, because tomorrow, the real game was going to begin. The next morning brought an announcement that changed everything. Listen up, Drill Instructor Williams called out as we stood in formation after morning chow. Today we're beginning advanced tactical training. This is an accelerated program designed to identify recruits with potential for special operations. My blood turned to ice water. Advanced tactical training. Special operations potential. This wasn't part of the normal bootcamp curriculum. This was the program my father had been brought here to run. The classified training that had been hidden behind routine recruit processing. Participation is voluntary, Williams continued. But understand that volunteers will be held to a higher standard. The training will be more intense, the expectations greater, and the failure rate significant. Around me, I could see recruits straightening up with interest. The chance to prove themselves, to stand out from the crowd, to maybe earn their way into an elite unit. For most of them, this would seem like an opportunity. For me, it was a trap, because anyone with legitimate special operations experience would have to work 10 times harder to hide their skills in an advanced program. The margin for error would shrink to nothing. One moment of muscle memory, one reflex that was too fast or too precise, and my cover would be blown. But not volunteering would be equally suspicious. Marcus Chen, the recruit trying to make his father proud, wouldn't pass up a chance to prove himself. Even if he was afraid of failing, he'd still try. Volunteers stepped forward, Williams ordered. I hesitated for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to suggest uncertainty, not long enough to suggest reluctance, then stepped forward with about 30 other recruits. Rodriguez was one of them. So were Williams and Davis, the two I'd identified as possible infiltrators, along with 27 others who either had something to prove or something to hide. Outstanding, Williams said, but his smile had sharp edges. Report to Building C at 1400 hours, bring full gear, and understand that once this training begins, there's no going back. You're committed until completion or elimination. Elimination, not failure. Elimination, like Phoenix team had been eliminated. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of normal training and nervous anticipation. I went through the motions of being excited and worried, asking the kinds of questions an inexperienced recruit would ask about special operations training. But internally, I was preparing for war. Because that's what this was, not training, not evaluation. This was a sophisticated operation designed to identify and eliminate threats to someone's security. And I was walking straight into it with my eyes open. At 13:30 hours, I was getting my gear ready when Rodriguez approached. You nervous? He asked. Terrified, I admitted, which was actually true. Yeah, me too. He sat down on his footlocker and lowered his voice. Can I ask you something? I nodded. Last night, did you notice anyone moving around the barracks after lights out? Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. This was either a very dangerous question, or a very important one. What do you mean? Someone was walking around, checking on people. I heard them stop next to my rack for like 5 minutes. Probably just a drill instructor doing bed checks. Rodriguez shook his head. Drill instructors move different, heavier. This was someone trying to be quiet. You think it was another recruit? Maybe. He studied my face carefully. Or maybe someone else, someone who's not who they're pretending to be. The words hung in the air between us, like an unexploded bomb. Rodriguez wasn't just observant, he was aware. Which meant he was either very smart or very dangerous. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I think we might have more in common than either of us is ready to admit. Before I could respond, the conversation was interrupted by Williams calling for formation. Time to go. Building C was on the far side of the base, away from the main training area. It was older than the other structures, built of concrete and steel with windows that had been painted black from the inside. The kind of building where classified things happened and uncomfortable questions weren't asked. We formed up outside while we waited for instruction. 30 volunteers. All of us trying to look eager and confident while probably feeling various levels of terror and uncertainty. At exactly 1400 hours, the door opened and my father stepped out. But he wasn't alone. Behind him came the man I'd encountered near the administrative building. Still nameless, still forgettable, still watching everything with those calculating eyes. And behind him came someone who made my heart skip a beat. Colonel Sarah Voss, former commanding officer of Nightfall Squadron. The woman who'd given me my final orders before the program was disbanded. The woman who'd told me to disappear and never contact anyone from my old life. The woman who was supposed to be dead. I fought to keep my expression neutral, to show nothing more than the mild curiosity a recruit might feel when meeting senior officers. But inside, my world was turning upside down. Voss was alive. Voss was here. And Voss was part of whatever was happening at Camp Meridian, which meant this entire situation was more complicated than I'd imagined. Gentlemen, my father said, his voice carrying across the formation with parade ground authority, welcome to Phase 2. For the next 72 hours, you will be tested in ways that will push you beyond your limit. You will be evaluated not just on your physical capabilities, but on your psychological resilience, your tactical thinking, and your ability to function under extreme stress. He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the group. When they found me, I saw something I'd never seen before in David Chen's face. Not disappointment, not anger, something closer to anticipation. This training is classified, he continued. You will not discuss it with anyone outside this group. You will not write about it in letters home. You will not mention it in phone calls or emails. What happens here stays here. Colonel Voss stepped forward. Some of you will not complete this program. That's not a threat. It's a statistical certainty. The training is designed to identify individuals with specific psychological and physical profiles. If you don't possess those profiles, you will be removed from the program and returned to normal recruit processing. The nameless man added, and if you do possess those profiles, your military career will take a very different direction. I understood now. This wasn't just advanced training. This was recruit. They were looking for candidates for something, probably a program designed to replace Nightfall Squadron. And they were using a systematic process to identify the best prospects. But they were also using it to identify threats. People who might have knowledge of previous programs. People who might ask uncomfortable questions. People like me. Any questions? My father asked. No one moved. Outstanding. Follow me. We were led into Building C through a security checkpoint that included metal detectors and biometric scanners. The interior was nothing like a normal military training facility. No motivational posters, no historical displays, no signs of institutional pride, just blank corridors, unmarked doors, and the kind of sterile efficiency that suggested serious government work. We were taken to a large room that looked like a cross between a classroom and an interrogation chamber. 30 desks arranged in rows, each equipped with a computer terminal and a thick folder. Take a seat, Colonel Voss instructed. I chose one in the middle of the room, close enough to hear what others were doing but far enough from the front to avoid drawing attention. Rodriguez sat 2 rows behind me. Williams and Davis were scattered throughout the room. Open your folders, the nameless man said. Inside you'll find your first evaluation. You have 2 hours to complete it. Begin now. I opened the folder and found myself looking at something that made my blood freeze. A psychological profile questionnaire, but not the standard military version used to assess mental fitness. This was something much more sophisticated. Pages of questions designed to probe deep psychological patterns, reveal hidden knowledge and identify specific personality types. The kind of assessment used to screen candidates for special operations programs or to identify former special operations personnel trying to hide their backgrounds. I started reading, looking for the traps hidden in seemingly innocent questions. Describe a situation where you had to make a life or death decision with incomplete information. What is your greatest fear regarding authority figures? Have you ever been trained in advanced combat techniques? Describe your relationship with your father. Every question was a minefield. Answer too simply, and I'd seem like an uninteresting candidate for whatever they were recruiting for. Answer too thoroughly, and I'd reveal knowledge that Marcus Chen shouldn't possess. I began filling out the questionnaire, carefully crafting responses that would make me seem like a promising but inexperienced recruit, someone with potential but no training, someone worth developing but not dangerous. But as I worked, I became aware that this wasn't just an assessment, it was also surveillance. Cameras in the corners of the room, recording everything. Observers behind one-way glass, studying our body language and behavior, probably even biometric monitoring, measuring stress responses and micro-expressions. They weren't just evaluating our answers, they were evaluating how we answered, whether we showed signs of deception, whether we seemed comfortable with certain types of questions, whether our physiological responses matched our written responses. I forced myself to maintain the persona of Marcus Chen while my mind raced through the implications. This was sophisticated counterintelligence work, the kind of operation that required significant resources and high-level authorization. Someone very important wanted to know who was who, and they were willing to go to extraordinary lengths to find out. 2 hours later, we were told to close our folders and remain seated. The questionnaires were collected by personnel I didn't recognize, not Marines, probably civilian contractors with security clearances and flexible morals. Phase 1 complete, Colonel Voss announced. You will now proceed to Phase 2. Follow me. We were led deeper into the building, through corridors that felt increasingly isolated from the outside world. Past rooms with reinforced doors and no windows. Past offices where people in civilian clothes worked at computers displaying things we weren't supposed to see. Finally, we reached a large gymnasium that had been converted into something resembling an obstacle course. But this wasn't the standard military training setup. This was something more sophisticated, more dangerous. Phase 2 is physical evaluation, my father explained. You will complete this course individually. Your performance will be timed and recorded. You will be evaluated on speed, technique, and decision-making under stress. I studied the course while he talked. It was designed to test specific skills that weren't part of normal recruit training. Urban warfare techniques, close quarters combat. The kind of stuff that would be taught to special operations personnel. The kind of stuff that would be second nature to anyone with Nightfall Squadron experience. Chen, my father called out. You're first. Of course I was. I approached the starting line, trying to look nervous and uncertain. Around me, the other volunteers watched with the kind of attention that suggested they were taking mental notes for their own runs. Begin, Colonel Voss said. I started running. The first obstacle was a wall climb that required specific techniques to complete efficiently. I made it look like I was struggling, taking longer than necessary, using the kind of inefficient movement patterns a beginner would use. The second was a room-clearing exercise with simulated target. I fumbled with the weapon, missed several shots that I could have made blindfolded, and took twice as long as necessary to complete the course. The third was a rope traverse over a pit filled with water. I made it about halfway before losing my grip and falling in with a spectacular splash. By the time I finished the course, I was soaked, exhausted, and thoroughly embarrassed. Perfect performance for Marcus Chen, the disappointing recruit. But as I walked back to the group, I caught Colonel Voss making notes on a clipboard, and the expression on her face wasn't disappointment. It was interest, which meant my performance had been too good. Even while failing, I'd revealed skills that didn't match my cover identity. Rodriguez went next, and his performance was similarly clumsy but revealing. He completed the course in a time that suggested natural athleticism despite making numerous mistakes. Williams actually succeeded at several obstacles that should have been beyond a recruit's capability. His explanation was that he'd been a competitive gymnast in high school, but his movement patterns suggested military training. Davis fell off the rope climb 3 times, but his weapon handling was suspiciously smooth for someone who'd supposedly only ever shot at farm animals. By the end of Phase 2, I was convinced that at least half the volunteers were not who they claimed to be. The question was whether the evaluators had reached the same conclusion. Phase 3 begins at 0500 tomorrow, the nameless man announced as we prepared to leave. Report here in full field gear. Bring everything you would need for a 3-day field exercise. As we filed out of the building, I noticed that our group was being escorted by more security personnel than before, not drill instructors, armed guards in civilian clothes who moved with the kind of professional competence that suggested military or law enforcement backgrounds. We were being treated less like recruits and more like suspects. That evening, I lay in my rack and stared at the ceiling, while the barracks settled into its usual nighttime rhythm. Around me, the other volunteers were trying to process what they'd experienced. Some were excited about being selected for advanced training. Others were nervous about what tomorrow might bring. None of them seemed to realize that we weren't being trained. We were being sorted, and sometime in the next 24 hours, people were going to start disappearing, just like Johnson, Patterson, and Kowalski, just like Phoenix Team. In the darkness, I made a decision that would either save my life or end it. I was going to stop hiding, because if Colonel Voss was alive and involved in whatever was happening at Camp Meridian, then the official story about Nightfall Squadron's disbandment was a lie. And if that was a lie, then everything else I'd been told was probably false too. Which meant I wasn't the only survivor, which meant this entire operation might be bigger than anyone imagined, and which meant that Marcus Chen, the disappointing recruit, was about to become a much more dangerous individual. But first, I had to survive Phase 3. Phase 3 began before dawn with an announcement that changed the rules of the game. Gentlemen, my father said, as we stood in formation outside Building C. Today's exercise is simple. You will be divided into teams of 5. Each team will be given a mission objective and inserted into the training area. You have 12 hours to complete your mission and return to base. Simple. Right. However, Colonel Voss added, stepping forward into the circle of light cast by the overhead floods, you will not be alone in the field. Professional hunters will be tracking you. Their mission is to capture or eliminate your teams before you can complete your objective. Hunters. Not instructors. Not evaluators. Hunters. This is a live fire exercise. The nameless man continued. You will be equipped with blank ammunition, but the hunters will have non-lethal rounds that will cause significant pain and leave marks that will last for weeks. If you are shot, you are dead. If you are captured, you are dead. Dead personnel will be removed from the exercise and from the program. Around me, I could feel the energy of the group changing. What had started as nervous excitement was shifting towards something closer to fear. This wasn't training anymore. This was survival. Teams will be assigned randomly, my father announced, pulling names from a helmet. Team 1, Rodriguez, Williams, Davis, Parks, and Chen. Of course, the 5 people I'd identified as possible infiltrators had been placed together. Either that was an incredible coincidence or someone had been watching the same people I had. We were given 30 minutes to plan, 30 minutes to gear up, and 30 minutes to say whatever prayers we thought might help. Our equipment was basic: web gear, canteens, compasses, maps, and M16s loaded with blank ammunition. No radios, no GPS, no night vision. We were going into the field with the same gear a recruit would have had 40 years ago. But that didn't mean we were helpless. Not if my suspicions about the other team members were correct. Okay, Rodriguez said as we huddled around a map of the training area. Our objective is to reach this point. He tapped a location about 8 kilometers north of our insertion point. Retrieve a package and return to base without being captured. What kind of package? Williams asked. Doesn't matter, Davis replied. What matters is that we have professional hunters tracking us through terrain they know better than we do. How professional? Parks asked. He was the one member of our team I hadn't identified as suspicious. Young, nervous, probably legitimately just a recruit who'd volunteered for the wrong reasons. I decided to test the waters. Depends on who's running the exercise. Could be regular Marine instructors, could be special operations personnel, could be contractors. Rodriguez looked at me sharp. How would you know the difference? I wouldn't, I said quickly. Just guessing. But Williams was already shaking his head. Contractors would use different equipment, different tactics. They'd hunt like professionals, not like trainers. Davis added. Plus they'd be paid to actually catch us, not just to provide a training experience. Too much knowledge. All of us were revealing things we shouldn't know. I made a decision that was either brilliant or suicide. Look, I said, keeping my voice low. I think we need to be honest with each other. This isn't normal recruit training. Those aren't normal instructors, and I'm willing to bet that none of us are normal recruits. The silence that followed was deafening. Rodriguez spoke first. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we stop pretending to be people we're not, and start working together as people we actually are. Williams laughed, but there was no humor in it. And who do you think we actually are? I looked each of them in the eye. I think we're people with training that doesn't match our cover stories. I think we're here for reasons that have nothing to do with serving our country. And I think that if we don't start working together, we're all going to end up like Johnson, Patterson, and Kowalski. Davis went very still. What do you know about them? I know they disappeared after an inspection that wasn't looking for contraband. I know their gear vanished, like they'd never existed. And I know that whatever happened to them is going to happen to us if we don't figure out how to survive the next 12 hours. Parks was looking back and forth between us like he'd stumbled into a conversation in a foreign language. What are you guys talking about? Rodriguez studied my face for a long moment. Then he said, Marcus, what's your real name? Everything hung in the balance. If I was wrong about these people, I was about to blow my cover to potential enemy agents. If I was right, I was about to gain allies who might help me survive. Either way, there was no going back. My real name is Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, I said quietly. Former Navy SEAL. Former member of a classified unit called Nightfall Squadron. I'm here because someone sent me a message, suggesting that my father is involved in something connected to my old unit. The reaction was immediate. Williams, Jesus Christ. Davis, Nightfall Squadron was Rodriguez. Your father is Sergeant Major Chen. And Parks, what the hell is Nightfall Squadron? Rodriguez answered that one. Nightfall Squadron was a joint special operations unit, that supposedly disbanded 3 years ago after a mission went wrong. But most people thought it was just a rumor. It wasn't a rumor, I said. And it didn't disband because of a mission gone wrong. It was shut down because someone wanted to eliminate witnesses to operations that never officially happened. Williams was staring at me with something approaching awe. You're one of them. You're actually one of them. Who are you? I asked. Staff Sergeant Kevin Williams, Army Rangers. Former member of a unit called Phoenix Team. The words hit me like a physical blow. Phoenix Team is dead, I saw the reports. The reports were fake. 12 of us were supposedly killed in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. Actually, we were extracted and given new identities because someone suspected we were going to expose illegal operations. Davis nodded slowly. Captain Lisa Davis, Air Force Special Operations, former member of something called Ghost Protocol. Same story, officially dead, actually in hiding. Rodriguez was the last to speak. Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, Marine Force Recon, former member of a unit so classified it didn't even have a name, just a number. Team 7. I looked at Parks. And you? I'm just a recruit, he said, his voice cracking with stress. I don't know what any of this means. It means, Rodriguez said grimly, that someone has been collecting former Special Operations personnel and bringing them here under false pretenses. But why? Parks asked. Williams answered, because someone wants us dead. All of us. We're loose ends that need to be tied up. I was processing the implications when a new voice interrupted our conversation. Actually, the voice said, someone wants you recruited. We spun around to find Colonel Voss standing at the edge of our planning area. She was alone, unarmed, hands visible. But her presence still sent adrenaline shooting through my system. Hello, James, she said using my real name. It's good to see you alive. Colonel, I kept my voice steady despite the fact that my world was falling apart. I thought you were dead. I thought the same about you, and Kevin, and Lisa, and Miguel. She looked at each of us in turn. But it seems reports of our deaths have been greatly exaggerated. What the hell is going on? Williams demanded. Voss glanced around, checking for observers, then stepped closer. What's going on is that someone has been systematically hunting down and eliminating former Special Operations personnel. Phoenix Team, Ghost Protocol, Team 7, Nightfall Squadron. All of them. The official story is that these units were disbanded for security reasons. The truth is that they were liquidated because they'd become politically inconvenient. Liquidated by who? Rodriguez asked. That's what we're here to find out. But first, we have to survive the next 12 hours. Davis was studying Voss with the kind of attention that suggested she was looking for deception. How do we know you're not part of whatever's hunting us? Because, Voss said, if I were part of it, you'd already be dead. Fair point. So what's the real mission? The real mission is to identify who's behind the elimination program, and gather enough evidence to expose them before they can finish the job. And the hunting exercise is designed to see which of you are capable of surviving long enough to be useful. Voss checked her watch. You have 11 hours and 43 minutes to prove yourselves. The hunters tracking you are professional killers using non-lethal rounds. If they catch you, you'll be removed from the exercise and transferred to a facility where you'll be interrogated until you tell them everything you know about your former units. And then, Williams asked, and then you'll disappear permanently. Parks was looking pale. What about me? I'm not part of any of this. Voss studied him for a moment. No, you're not, which means you have a choice. You can opt out of the exercise right now and return to normal recruit processing, or you can stay with this team and become part of something larger. What kind of something larger? The kind that fights back against people who eliminate inconvenient soldiers. Parks was quiet for a long moment, then he said, if I go back to normal processing, what happens to them? They probably die. And if I stay, you might die too, but you might also help save them. Parks looked at each of us, then back at Voss. I'm staying. Voss nodded approvingly. Outstanding. Here's what you need to know. The hunting teams are professionals. But they're not expecting you to fight back with your real skills. They think you're confused recruits who might get lucky. That's your advantage. She handed Rodriguez a different map than the one we'd been given. Your real objective is this facility, about 15 kilometers north. It's a communications site that's been monitoring all electronic traffic to and from Camp Meridian. You need to access their computers and download everything they have on Operation Phoenix Rising. What's Phoenix Rising? I asked. The code name for the elimination program targeting former special operations personnel. Williams was studying the new map. This facility is off limits to military personnel, high security, probably civilian contractors. Correct, which means you'll need to approach it like a real special operations mission, not a training exercise. Equipment, Davis asked. What you have plus whatever you can acquire in the field. Be creative. Rodriguez folded the map and tucked it into his gear. Rules of engagement: survive. Complete the mission. Don't get caught. Voss stepped back. Any questions? Yeah, I said. Are you coming with us? No, I have my own mission. But James, she caught my eye. Your father isn't the enemy, he's being used by people who are leveraging his relationship with you to get what they want. Which is information about Nightfall Squadron that only you would know. Before I could ask another question, she was gone, disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness like the ghost she'd trained us all to be. We spent the remaining 20 minutes completely replanning our mission. No longer were we playing a training exercise. We were conducting a real special operations infiltration against a target that would probably shoot to kill if they caught us. Okay, Rodriguez said as we prepared to move out. New plan. We approach the communications facility using real tactics. We assume enemy contact is likely. We extract the intelligence and get out without leaving traces. What about the blanks? Parks asked, gesturing to our M16s. Williams smiled grimly. First thing we do is acquire real ammunition. From where? From the hunter. As we prepared to leave the assembly area, I took one last look back at Building C. Through a window on the second floor, I could see my father standing with the nameless man, both of them studying a map that probably showed our insertion point. For a moment, our eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, I saw something in David Chen's face that I'd never seen before. Fear. Not fear of me, fear for me. Which meant Colonel Voss was right, he wasn't the enemy. But it also meant that the people who were using him might be more dangerous than any of us had imagined. We moved out into the darkness, 5 former special operations personnel, and 1 very brave recruit, heading toward a target that might contain the answers we'd all been looking for. Or toward an ambush that would eliminate the last witnesses to crimes that had never officially been committed. Either way, the hunt was on. And for the first time since I'd arrived at Camp Meridian, I wasn't the one being hunted. We moved through the pre-dawn darkness like ghosts returning to their natural element. The training area was 20 square kilometers of desert scrub, rocky hills, and dry washes that could hide an army or expose a single careless step. Perfect terrain for hunters and prey alike. Our first priority was establishing whether we were actually being tracked. Standard counter-surveillance protocol: move for 30 minutes, then stop and observe. If someone was following us, they'd either reveal themselves during movement, or be forced to stop when we stopped. We found our first hunters 15 minutes into the exercise. 2 o'clock, Williams whispered, barely audible even though he was right next to me. 500 meters, 2 personnel, professional spacing. I scanned the area until I found them. 2 figures in desert camouflage moving parallel to our route, far enough back to avoid detection but close enough to maintain contact. Their movement patterns were textbook special operations, deliberate, coordinated, confident. Military, Rodriguez asked. Definitely, Davis confirmed. Rangers, maybe SEALs. Which meant Colonel Voss had been right. These weren't instructors playing war games. These were professional soldiers conducting a real hunting operation. More contacts, Parks whispered, surprising all of. For someone with no special operations training, he was showing remarkable situational awareness. 10 o'clock, about 800 meters, 3 personnel. I found them too. Another hunting team, positioned to cut off our escape route if we turned west. Classic herding pattern, I observed. They're not trying to catch us yet. They're pushing us toward a predetermined kill zone. How many teams? Williams asked. Rodriguez was scanning the entire area with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent years staying alive in hostile territory. I count at least 3 so far, probably more positioned along our route. So what's the play? Davis asked. I thought about it. In Nightfall Squadron, we'd trained for exactly this scenario. being hunted by professional personnel through terrain they control. The conventional wisdom was to avoid contact, complete the mission without engagement. But this wasn't a conventional situation. "We take them," I said. Everyone looked at me like I'd suggested we set ourselves on fire. "Explain," Rodriguez said carefully. "They think we're confused recruits who might get lucky. They're not expecting us to fight back with professional tactics. That gives us a huge advantage if we're willing to use it." Williams was nodding slowly. "Plus, we need real ammunition if we're going to infiltrate the communications facility. Plus," Davis added, "if we eliminate the hunting teams, we'll have 12 hours to complete our real mission without interference." Parks was looking back and forth between us. "You want to attack professional soldiers?" "We want to neutralize professional soldiers," Rodriguez corrected. "There's a difference." "What kind of difference?" "The kind that keeps us alive and completes the mission." We spent 20 minutes planning the ambush. Classic L-shaped formation with overlapping fields of fire. Rodriguez and Williams would take the team to our east. Davis and I would take the team to our north. Parks would provide overwatch and early warning from an elevated position. The key was timing. We had to hit both teams simultaneously to prevent either one from calling for support. "Remember," I said as we prepared to move into position, "non-lethal force only. These are Marines, following orders, not the people who gave the orders." "Copy that," Williams replied. "Disable, disarm, disappear." We split up and began moving into position. The desert was silent, except for the whisper of wind through sagebrush and the distant sound of helicopters that might have been part of the exercise, or might have been something more serious. I found myself thinking about Colonel Voss as Davis and I made our way toward the northern hunting team. 3 years ago, she'd been my commanding officer, and one of the most competent special operations leaders I'd ever served under. When Nightfall Squadron was disbanded, I'd assumed she'd either been eliminated or had disappeared into civilian life. Instead, she was here apparently running her own operation against the people who'd destroyed our unit, which raised about 1,000 questions I didn't have time to think about. "In position," Rodriguez's voice came through the darkness, barely audible but clear enough to understand. Davis and I had reached our own position, a low ridge that gave us clear sightlines to the hunting team below. 3 personnel. Exactly as Parks had reported. Professional spacing, quality equipment, moving with the kind of confidence that suggested they'd done this before. "I count 3 targets," I whispered to Davis. "Standard fire team formation. Rules of engagement: neutralize without permanent damage. Priority on the team leader, he'll have the radio." "Copy." We waited until the hunting team was in the perfect position, spread out enough that they couldn't support each other immediately, but close enough that we could engage all 3 simultaneously. "Execute," I whispered. Rodriguez and Williams hit their targets first. I heard the soft sound of suppressed weapons. Where had they gotten those? Followed by 3 quick thumps that suggested successful neutralization. Our targets reacted immediately, dropping into firing positions and scanning for threats. But they were looking in the wrong direction. Davis took the left and right targets with precise shots that dropped them immediately. I put 2 rounds into the team leader's chest, watching him go down hard enough to be convincing, but gentle enough to avoid serious injury. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. "All targets down," Rodriguez reported. "Same here," I replied. We moved in to secure the hunting teams, zip-tying their hands and feet, confiscating their equipment, and most importantly, taking their ammunition. Real rounds instead of blanks, plus some equipment upgrades that would make the rest of our mission significantly easier. "Nice work," Williams said as we regrouped. "Where did you get the suppressed weapons?" Rodriguez smiled. "Creative acquisition. Turns out, one of the hunting teams was carrying some very interesting gear." "What kind of gear?" Davis answered that one, holding up a device that looked like a military-grade radio, but with modifications that suggested serious technology. "Communication intercept equipment. They weren't just hunting us, they were monitoring all electronic traffic in the area." which means someone is very interested in what we might say to each other. I observed. Parks was examining one of the hunter's rifles. These aren't training weapons. These are military issue, with live ammunition. Williams checked the unconscious team leader's identification. Marine Corps, Force Recon. But look at this. He held up a laminated card with official-looking printing, special authorization for live fire operations against designated targets. Designated targets? Rodriguez asked. Us, I said grimly. We're not training exercise participants. We're designated targets in a live fire elimination operation. The implications were staggering. This wasn't training disguised as an elimination operation. This was an elimination operation disguised as training. How many other teams? Davis asked. I counted the radio frequencies programmed into the communications equipment we'd captured. At least 6 more, plus command and control, plus extraction teams. Extraction teams for who? For the hunters when they finish the job. Rodriguez was studying the terrain ahead of us. New plan. We can't proceed to the communications facility with 6 more hunting teams between us and the target. Agreed, Williams said. We need to eliminate the entire hunting force before we can complete the primary mission. Parks was looking overwhelmed. You want to fight 6 more teams of professional soldiers? I want to survive, I replied. And the only way to do that is to remove the threat. We spent the next hour conducting a systematic campaign against the remaining hunting team. Using their own communication equipment against them, we were able to track their positions and coordinate ambushes that eliminated them one by one. The operations went smoothly, too smooth. By 0800 hours, we had neutralized all 6 hunting teams, confiscated enough equipment to outfit a small army, and had a clear route to the communications facility. But something was wrong. This was too easy, Williams said, voicing what we were all thinking. Professional hunting teams don't get eliminated this quickly by targets they're supposed to be superior to. Rodriguez agreed. Davis was examining the communication equipment more carefully. I think I know. Look at this. She held up a device that looked like a standard military radio, but with additional circuits and antennas. This isn't just communication equipment, it's tracking and monitoring gear. Monitoring what? Parks asked. Us. Our performance. Our tactics. Our level of skill. The truth hit me like a physical blow. We weren't being hunted, we were being tested. Tested for what? Williams asked. To see if we're really who we claim to be. To see if we have the skills that former special operations personnel would have. Rodriguez was nodding slowly, and now they know. Which means, Davis said grimly, the real hunt is about to begin. As if summoned by her words, the sound of helicopters suddenly filled the air. Not the distant background noise we'd been hearing all morning, but the immediate overwhelming sound of aircraft moving fast and low in our direction. How many? I asked, scanning the sky. Parks pointed toward the north. 3, no, 4. Coming from multiple directions. Williams was already moving toward better cover. Those aren't transport helicopters. Those are attack birds. The helicopters came into view moments later, 4 Blackhawks in assault formation, flying NOE nap of the earth. To avoid detection until the last possible moment. Professional aviation, Rodriguez observed with the calm of someone who'd been in similar situations before. Military pilots, military aircraft, military mission. Rules of engagement? Davis asked. I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. The helicopters were moving into positions that would allow them to establish a complete perimeter around our location. In about 3 minutes, we'd be surrounded by overwhelming firepower with no avenue of escape. We run, I said. Where? Parks asked. I pointed toward a series of rocky hills about 2 kilometers east. There, terrain that will neutralize their aviation advantage. And then we complete the mission. We began moving immediately, using every piece of cover the terrain provided to avoid being spotted from the air. But the helicopters had advantages beyond just firepower. They had speed, elevation, and sophisticated surveillance equipment that could track us even when we thought we were hidden. Contact rear, Williams called out as we reached the base of the rocky hills. Ground personnel, moving fast. I looked back to see figures fast roping from the helicopters. Professional insertion, professional spacing, professional equipment. How many? Rodriguez asked. At least 20, probably more. Davis was scanning the hills ahead of us. Multiple routes up, but they'll all funnel us into predictable positions. What about the communications facility? Parks asked. Still the mission, I replied. But now we have to complete it while being hunted by professional soldiers with air support. As we began climbing into the hills, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was proceeding according to someone's plan. The hunting teams had been too easy to eliminate. The helicopters had arrived too quickly. The entire situation felt orchestrated, which meant that either we were walking into a trap, or someone was providing us with exactly the kind of test that would prove we were who we claimed to be. Either way, the stakes had just gotten higher, and the real test was just beginning. The communications facility sat in a bowl-shaped valley, 15 kilometers north of Camp Meridian, surrounded by terrain that made it nearly impossible to approach without being detected. 3 concentric perimeters of security, overlapping fields of observation, and enough electronic surveillance equipment to monitor half the state of California. It was also completely invisible from the air, hidden beneath camouflage netting and electronic countermeasures that would make it appear to be nothing more than empty desert to anyone scanning with standard reconnaissance equipment. Professional work, the kind of facility that didn't exist on any official maps. We'd spent 6 hours moving through the hills, staying ahead of the hunting teams that were tracking us with methodical precision. They weren't trying to catch us, they were herding us toward this exact location, which meant that either the communications facility was a trap, or someone wanted us to complete our mission badly enough to provide us with an escort. Security assessment, I said as we lay in concealment on a ridge overlooking the facility. Rodriguez studied the perimeter through captured binoculars. 3 guard towers, rotating patrols, motion sensors, standard military security protocols, electronic countermeasures, Davis asked. Williams was examining the facility with equipment we'd acquired from the hunting teams, jamming equipment for radio and cell phone communications, probably listening devices for any electronic emissions within a 5-kilometer radius. Personnel count, Parks asked. I count 12 visible. Probably twice that many inside the facility. Rodriguez lowered the binocular. Professional security, but not overwhelming numbers. Approach routes? Davis had been studying the terrain. 2 possibilities. Eastern approach through the drainage ditch would put us inside the outer perimeter, but we'd be exposed crossing the open ground to the main building. Western approach uses better cover but requires crossing 2 security checkpoints. Time constraints. I checked my watch. We had 4 hours before our supposed return to base, but the hunting teams behind us were closing the distance, and the helicopters had been conducting search patterns that suggested they knew our general location. We need to be inside within 30 minutes and out within 90 minutes, I said. What's the priority intelligence? Williams asked. Anything on Phoenix Rising, anything on the elimination of special operations units, anything that connects Camp Meridian to the disappearance of former military personnel. Rodriguez was still studying the facility. This isn't a standard communication site. Look at the antenna array. That's not for normal military traffic. That's for intercepting and analyzing communications from multiple sources. SIGINT, Davis said. Signals intelligence. They're monitoring everything electronic within probably a 100-kilometer radius, which means they know about every phone call, every email, every electronic communication to or from anyone connected to this operation. Williams added. Parks was looking confused. If they can monitor everything, don't they already know we're here? They know someone's here, I replied, but they might not know who we are, or what we're capable of. Or Rodriguez said grimly, they know exactly who we are and this entire situation is an elaborate setup. Either possibility was equally dangerous, but we'd come too far to turn back now. Infiltration plan. Rodriguez and Williams take the eastern approach, create a distraction at the outer perimeter. Davis, Parks and I take the western route, penetrate the facility, acquire the intelligence and extract. Extraction point? Williams asked. Davis pointed to a section of the perimeter that offered the best cover, rally point at the drainage ditch. If anyone gets separated, we meet there and extract together. Rules of engagement. Non-lethal force unless fired upon with lethal intent. These are security personnel doing their jobs, not the people responsible for the elimination program. We spent 20 minutes preparing equipment and reviewing the plan. The gear we'd acquired from the hunting teams included some items that would make the infiltration much easier: night vision equipment, electronic surveillance gear, and communication devices that would allow us to coordinate without being detected by the facility's monitoring equipment. But as we prepared to move out, something nagged at me. The facility was too easy to find, too convenient to our mission requirements, too perfectly positioned to provide the intelligence we needed. Anyone else think this feels like a setup? I asked. Everyone nodded. So why are we proceeding? Parks asked. Rodriguez answered, because whether it's a setup or not, we need the intelligence, and because the people hunting us aren't going to stop just because we decide not to complete the mission. Plus, Williams added, if it is a setup, the best way to spring it is to approach it professionally, and be ready for whatever happens. And if it's not a setup, Davis asked, then we get the intelligence we need, and expose the people responsible for eliminating special operations personnel, I replied. We moved out at 100 hours, splitting into 2 teams and approaching the facility from different directions. The terrain was perfect for infiltration, rocky broken ground with plenty of natural cover and concealment, but it was also perfect for defense, which meant that if we were walking into an ambush, we'd have very few options for escape. Rodriguez and Williams reached their position first, setting up to create a distraction that would draw attention away from our approach route. But as Davis, Parks, and I moved toward the western perimeter, I noticed something that sent adrenaline shooting through my system. The security guards weren't guarding, they were positioned correctly, equipped properly, and appeared to be conducting normal security operations, but their body language was wrong. Instead of watching for threats, they were watching for something specific. Instead of scanning their assigned sectors, they were focused on predetermined positions. They were waiting for us. Abort? Davis whispered, picking up on the same signals. I thought about, we could abort the mission, extract from the area, and try to complete our objectives through other means. But the hunting teams behind us weren't going to disappear, and we still needed the intelligence. Negative, I replied. We continue, but we assume hostile reception. We moved closer to the perimeter, using techniques that Nightfall Squadron had developed for infiltrating facilities exactly like this one. Low, slow, silent movement that took advantage of every piece of natural concealment. Professional techniques that should have been invisible to standard security personnel. But as we reached the outer wire, something happened that confirmed my worst fears. One of the security guards turned and looked directly at our position, not scanning the air, not conducting a routine observation. He turned and looked at the exact spot where we were concealed, as if he'd been told precisely where to look. We're burned, I whispered to Davis. How? Doesn't matter, we're expected. Parks was looking at me with wide eyes. What do we complete the mission, because at this point, the only way out was through. We crossed the perimeter, exactly where we'd planned, but instead of the stealthy infiltration we'd prepared for, we moved quickly and decisively. If they knew we were coming, there was no point in trying to hide. The facility's main building was a 2-story structure that looked like a cross between a military command center and a corporate office building. Functional architecture, multiple antennas, and the kind of serious security that suggested important work happening inside. But the front door was unlocked. This is definitely a trap, Davis observed as we approached the building. Agreed, I replied. We're proceeding anyway. The interior of the building was exactly what I'd expected. Corridors lined with electronic equipment, offices filled with computers and communication gear, and the kind of sterile efficiency that suggested serious intelligence work. But it was also completely empty. No person, no security guards, no sounds of activity, just humming electronics and the kind of silence that suggested everyone had left in a hurry. Where is everybody? Parks whispered. Good question, Davis replied, scanning the corridor with her weapon ready. We moved deeper into the building, checking each room systematically. Offices full of abandoned computers, conference rooms, with materials still spread on tables, a break room with coffee still warm in the pot. Everyone had left recently, very recently. Communications center, I said, pointing toward a door marked with security warnings and electronic locks that were currently standing open. Inside, we found exactly what Colonel Voss had sent us to find: a room full of sophisticated electronic equipment, designed to monitor, intercept and analyze communications from multiple sources, banks of computers, wall-mounted displays showing real-time intelligence, and filing cabinets that probably contained enough classified material to end several political careers. But more importantly, we found active computer terminals with someone still logged in. Phoenix Rising, Davis said, pointing to a computer screen, displaying a file directory with that exact name. I sat down at the terminal and began downloading everything: personnel files, operation summaries, financial records, correspondence between military and civilian authorities, thousands of documents that painted a picture of a systematic program designed to eliminate former special operations personnel who might have inconvenient knowledge about illegal operations. But as I worked, I became aware that Parks was standing at the window, looking out at the facility's perimeter with an expression of growing alarm. Guys, he said, we have a problem. Davis and I moved to the window to see what he was looking at. The hunting teams that had been tracking us through the hills were now surrounding the facility, not approaching, surrounding, establishing a complete perimeter with overlapping fields of fire that would make escape virtually impossible. How many? I asked. Rodriguez's voice came through our captured communication equipment. At least 30 personnel visible, probably more in reserve, professional deployment, military equipment. Status of the distraction? No longer relevant. They're not responding to our activities at all. They're focused on the main building, which meant they knew exactly where we were and what we were doing. Download status? Davis asked. I checked the computer. 60% complete. I need another 10 minutes. Time we don't have, Parks observed as helicopters appeared over the facility. But Williams's voice came through the radio with information that changed everything. Check the files you're downloading. Look for anything about Command Authority. I searched the directory while the download continued. Command Authority appeared in dozens of files, all of them classified at levels that required special clearances. I opened one at random and found myself looking at something that made my blood turn cold. A list of former Special Operations personnel marked for elimination, with detailed information about their current identities, locations and activities. My name was on the list. So were Williams's, Davis's, Rodriguez's, and about 50 others. But more importantly, the list included authorization signatures from military and civilian authorities at the highest levels of government. Phoenix Rising wasn't a rogue operation conducted by individual bad actors. It was an official program, authorized by people with the power to make special operations personnel disappear permanently. Download complete, I announced as the last files transferred to our portable storage device. Extraction time, Davis said. But as we prepared to leave the communications center, Parks made an observation that stopped us cold. If they wanted to capture us, why did they let us get the intelligence first? It was a good question, and the answer was either that they'd made a tactical error, or that someone had wanted us to discover the truth about Phoenix Rising. Either way, we now had the evidence we'd come for. The question was whether we'd live long enough to use it. The extraction from the communications facility should have been impossible. 30 professional soldiers, air support, and a kill zone with no viable escape routes. Standard special operations doctrine would have called for surrender or a last stand. Instead, we walked out the front door. Not because we were invisible, not because we were better than the people surrounding us, but because someone with serious authority had given orders that we were to be allowed to leave. The hunting teams watched us go, made no attempt to intercept us, didn't even point their weapons in our direction. This is either the best luck we've ever had, Rodriguez observed, as we moved away from the facility, or the most sophisticated manipulation I've ever seen. Vote for manipulation, Williams replied. We'd reached the rally point, and were preparing to move toward base, when Davis made an announcement that changed everything. I know who's running Phoenix Rising, she said, holding up a document she'd printed from the computers before we left. We gathered around as she spread the papers on a flat rock. What I saw made me question everything I thought I understood about the situation. The operation authorization was signed by 3 people, a civilian contractor, whose name I didn't recognize, a Department of Defense official whose signature was illegible, And someone I did recognize. Colonel Sarah Voss. That's impossible, I said. Voss is working against Phoenix Rising. She sent us to get this intelligence. Williams was studying the document more carefully. Date on this authorization is 3 weeks ago, right around the time you got the message that brought you here. Which means, Rodriguez said slowly, that Voss knew we were being manipulated into infiltrating this facility. Or, Davis said grimly, Voss is the one manipulating us. Parks was looking back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. I don't understand. Is she helping us or hunting us? Good question, I replied. But before anyone could answer, we were interrupted by the sound of a single helicopter approaching from the south. Not the attack formation we'd encountered earlier. One aircraft flying slowly, making no attempt at stealth. Transport bird, Rodriguez observed. Someone wants to talk. The helicopter, a UH-60 Blackhawk with no visible markings, landed in a clearing about 200 meters from our position. The engine spooled down, but didn't shut off, suggesting this was intended to be a brief encounter. 2 figures climbed out of the aircraft, Colonel Voss and my father. They walked toward our position with their hands visible, making it clear they weren't approaching as a threat. Time for some answers. We met them halfway, weapons lowered but ready, maintaining the kind of tactical spacing that would allow us to respond to threats from any direction. Congratulations, Voss said as she approached. You've successfully completed one of the most sophisticated counterintelligence operations in recent military history. Explain, Williams demanded. My father spoke for the first time since we'd begun the exercise. Phoenix Rising is real. The elimination of special operations personnel is real, but the program you discovered at the communications facility is the cover story, not the actual operation. What's the actual operation? Rodriguez asked. Voss answered, a systematic effort to identify, recruit, and protect former special operations personnel who have knowledge of illegal government activities. Protect them from who? Davis asked. From the people who authorized the illegal activities in the first place. I was beginning to understand, but the implications were staggering. You're saying the government is protecting us from the government. I'm saying that some parts of the government are protecting you from other parts of the government, my father replied. Parts that would prefer to eliminate inconvenient witnesses rather than face accountability for their actions. Parks was looking completely lost. So are we the good guys or the bad guys? We're the people trying to prevent good guys from being eliminated by bad guys, Voss explained. By pretending to be bad guys ourselves, Williams added, putting the pieces together. Exactly. The Phoenix Rising operation you discovered is designed to make it appear that the elimination program is being conducted by military personnel following authorized orders. In reality, it's being used to identify and protect the people who would otherwise be eliminated. Rodriguez was studying the authorization document Davis had found. So this signature of yours is real? It's real, Voss confirmed. I authorized the creation of a fake elimination program to provide cover for a real protection program. And the people we encountered today? I asked. Military personnel conducting a controlled exercise, designed to test your capabilities and confirm your identities, my father replied. And if we'd failed the test? Davis asked. You would have been returned to normal recruit processing and monitored discreetly to ensure your safety, Voss said. And since we passed, Williams asked. Since you passed, you're being offered the opportunity to join an organization that's dedicated to protecting people like you. I thought about it. 3 years ago, Nightfall Squadron had been disbanded and I'd been told to disappear into civilian life. I'd spent those years assuming I was being hunted, living under false identities, avoiding contact with anyone from my former life. Instead, I'd been being protected by people who wanted to preserve my life and my knowledge for future use. What kind of organization? Parks asked. The kind that investigates illegal government operations and holds people accountable for their actions, my father replied. The kind that ensures former special operations personnel aren't eliminated for inconvenient knowledge. And what makes you think we want to join this organization? Rodriguez asked. Voss smiled. Because you've spent the last 24 hours demonstrating exactly the kind of skills and dedication that the organization needs, and because the alternative is returning to civilian life while knowing that other people like you are still at risk. What about our families? Williams asked. Our civilian identities. Protected, my father said. Part of joining the organization is ensuring that your former lives remain secure. Davis was studying the papers she'd taken from the communications facility. What about this intelligence we downloaded? What happens to it? It becomes evidence in investigations that are already underway, Voss replied. Congressional oversight committees, Department of Justice inquiries, Inspector General investigation. The people responsible for the illegal operations will be held accountable, and the people we work for, I asked. People who believe that special operations personnel shouldn't be eliminated for doing their jobs. It was, I had to admit, a compelling offer. Instead of spending the rest of my life hiding from shadows, I could be part of an organization that was fighting back against the people who created those shadows. But there was still one question that needed answering. Why all the deception? Parks asked. Why not just contact us directly and ask if we wanted to join? My father answered that one. Because we needed to know that you were still capable of functioning as special operations personnel, and because the people we're fighting against are sophisticated enough that we couldn't risk direct contact until we were certain of your loyalties and capabilities. Plus, Voss added, some of you might have refused if you'd been approached direct. This way, you've demonstrated your commitment by completing the mission. Rodriguez was nodding slowly. So the entire boot camp experience, the humiliation, the testing, all of that was designed to provide cover for this recruitment operation. Correct, my father replied. And I want to apologize for the personal cost of that cover, particularly to you, James. I know this hasn't been easy. It was the first time he'd called me by my real name since I'd arrived at Camp Meridian, and the first time he'd ever apologized for anything. So what happens now? Williams asked. Now you decide, Voss said. Join the organization and help protect other people like yourselves. Or return to civilian life with the knowledge that you're being discreetly monitored for your own protection. How long do we have to decide? Davis asked. Right now, my father replied. The helicopter will take anyone who wants to join to a secure facility where you'll be briefed on your new mission. Anyone who wants to return to civilian life will be transported back to Camp Meridian and processed out of the Marine Corps with an honorable discharge. I looked at the other members of our team. Rodriguez was already moving toward the helicopter. His decision was made. Williams and Davis exchanged glances, then followed him. Parks was the only one who hesitated. What about me? He asked. I'm not former special operations. I'm just a recruit who got caught up in all this. Voss studied him carefully. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of courage and competence the organization needs. If you're interested, there's a place for you too. And if I'm not, then you return to normal recruit training and complete boot camp like nothing happened. Parks thought about it for a long moment. Then he looked at the rest of us and said, I'm in, which left only me. My father was watching with an expression I'd never seen before. Not disappointment, not anger, but something that looked like hope. James? Voss asked. I thought about the last 3 years, living under false identities, avoiding contact with anyone from my former life, always looking over my shoulder for threats that I now knew didn't exist. I thought about Johnson, Patterson, and Kowalski, who had probably been extracted for their own protection rather than eliminated. I thought about the opportunity to be part of something larger than myself again, to use the skills Nightfall Squadron had taught me for purposes that were actually worthwhile. And I thought about the fact that my father had spent months enduring my poor performance and public humiliation in order to provide cover for an operation designed to protect me. I'm in. 6 months later, I stood in the office of the organization that didn't have an official name, reading a report about the successful prosecution of 3 Department of Defense officials who had authorized the illegal elimination of former special operations personnel. The evidence we'd downloaded from the communications facility had been instrumental in building the case, along with testimony from 17 former special operations personnel who had been secretly relocated rather than eliminated. It had provided prosecutors with everything they needed to secure conviction. The people responsible were facing prison sentences that would ensure they never threatened anyone again. Rodriguez looked up from his own desk, where he was reviewing intelligence on a new case involving missing military contractors. Any word on the congressional hearing? Next month, I replied. Williams is scheduled to testify about Phoenix team. Davis is providing evidence on Ghost Protocol operations. What about Parks? I smiled. Parks is graduating from his accelerated training program next week. Apparently, he has a natural talent for intelligence analysis. And your father? Promoted to first sergeant and assigned to oversee a new program for protecting military personnel who report illegal activities. It was, I had to admit, a satisfying outcome. The people responsible for illegal operations were being held accountable, former special operations personnel were being protected rather than eliminated, and I was part of an organization that made sure both of those things continued to happen. But the best part was that Marcus Chen, the disappointing recruit, had officially never existed. Instead, I was James Mitchell again. Not exactly the same person I'd been before Nightfall Squadron, but someone who had incorporated the lessons of those 3 lost years into a new identity that felt genuine rather than manufactured. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. New case requires your expertise. Former Air Force personnel missing from 3 different bases. Possible elimination program. Are you available? I typed back. Send me the details. Because this was what I'd trained for, not just in Nightfall Squadron, but in everything that had happened since. The disappearance, the false identities, the careful investigation, the systematic uncovering of truth from carefully constructed lies. I'd spent 3 years thinking I was being hunted. Instead, I'd been learning how to hunt, and now, finally, I was hunting the right people. Outside my office window, I could see the desert where Camp Meridian conducted its training operations. Somewhere out there, new recruits were learning the basic skills they'd need to serve their country. Some of them were probably exactly who they appeared to be, young people looking for direction and discipline, but some of them were probably people like me, former special operations personnel who had been told they were being hunted, who had been living under false identities, who were slowly being gathered together for purposes they didn't yet understand. Eventually, if they proved themselves capable and trustworthy, they'd be offered the same choice I'd been given. Join an organization dedicated to protecting people like themselves, or return to civilian life with the knowledge that someone was watching out for them. Most of them would make the same choice I had, because once you've been part of something larger than yourself, once you've used specialized skills for meaningful purposes, it's hard to go back to pretending those skills don't exist. It's hard to go back to being someone you're not. I closed the report on the successful prosecution and opened the file on the missing Air Force personnel, 3 people who had disappeared within the last month, all of them former members of classified units, all of them living under false identity. Either someone was running a new elimination program, or someone was running a new recruitment program. Either way, it was going to require investigation by people who understood how these operations worked. People like me. I picked up my phone and dialed Rodriguez's extension. I asked when he answered. Where to? Air Force bases, missing persons case. Could be complicated. Could be dangerous? Probably. I'm in, because that's what we did now. We investigated the complicated and dangerous situations that threatened people who had served their country in ways that couldn't be officially acknowledged. We were the people who made sure the good guys stayed safe from the bad guys. Even when it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. I gathered my gear, said goodbye to my father who was still adjusting to having a son who wasn't a disappointment, and headed out to investigate another mystery involving former special operations personnel who might or might not be in danger. It wasn't the career I'd planned when I first enlisted, but it was the career I'd been training for my entire life, and for the first time since Nightfall Squadron was disbanded, I was exactly where I belonged. If you've made it this far, if you've stayed with Marcus, with James through every revelation, and every reversal, then you understand something important about stories like this one. They're not really about military operations or government conspiracies or special forces training. They're about finding out who you really are when everything you thought you knew about yourself turns out to be false. They're about discovering that the people you thought were your enemies might actually be protecting you, and the people you thought were protecting you might actually be your enemy. They're about learning that sometimes the only way to find the truth is to become someone else entirely, even if that means losing yourself in the process. And most importantly, they're about the moment when you realize that you don't need anyone's permission to be who you're meant to be, because that's what James Mitchell learned during his time as Marcus Chen, not that his father had been wrong about his capabilities, but that his father's opinion had never mattered as much as his own action, not that the military had been trying to eliminate him, but that there were people in positions of authority who valued his skills enough to go to extraordinary lengths to protect him. Not that he needed to hide from his past, but that his past had prepared him for a future he couldn't have imagined. Maybe you're reading this because you felt like Marcus Chen, overlooked, underestimated, told that you're not good enough for the things you want to do. Maybe you're reading this because you felt like James Mitchell, hiding parts of yourself, living under false pretenses, wondering if anyone would accept you if they knew who you really were. Maybe you're reading this because you're somewhere in between, trying to figure out which version of yourself is the real one. Here's what I want you to know. You don't have to choose. You can be both the person who struggles and the person who succeeds. You can be both the person who makes mistakes and the person who gets things right. You can be both the person who needs protection and the person who protects others. You can be all of these things because identity isn't a uniform you put on, it's a choice you make every day, about how you want to show up in the world. James Mitchell didn't become a hero because he had special training, or because he was naturally gifted at military operations. He became a hero because when he was given the choice between hiding and fighting back, between protecting himself and protecting others, between accepting the story he'd been told about himself and writing a new story, he chose to fight. He chose to protect. He chose to. And that choice is available to you too, not the choice to join a secret government organization, or to infiltrate military training programs, or to take on corrupt officials, but the choice to refuse to be defined by other people's limitations, the choice to use whatever skills you have for purposes that matter to you, the choice to be the person who stands up when standing up is required, the choice to be the person who stays when staying is what's needed, the choice to be the person who fights back when fighting back is the only option left. Those choices don't require special training or government authorization or anyone's permission, they just require you to decide that you're worth fighting for, that the people you care about are worth protecting, that the truth is worth discovering, even when it's hidden beneath layers of deception and manipulation. So wherever you are right now, whatever uniform you're wearing or not wearing, whatever rank you hold or don't hold, whatever authority you have or don't have, remember this: you're not too late, you're not too far behind, you're not forgotten, you're exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly the skills you're supposed to have, facing exactly the challenges you're equipped to handle. You just might not know it yet, but you, and when you do, you'll understand why James Mitchell spent 3 years thinking he was being hunted when he was actually being prepared, why Marcus Chen had to fail at everything before he could succeed at what mattered, why sometimes the only way to find out who you really are is to pretend to be someone else entirely. Thank you for reading this story. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for being the kind of person who believes that truth is worth fighting for, that people are worth protecting, and that everyone deserves the chance to discover who they're really meant to be. Now go write your own story, make it a good one.